Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm running a bit late today, apparently, because, well, I forgot to hit the start stream button. So, go figure. Welcome to WineShark Wednesday. It's your true host here, the WineShark. Well, I hope everybody's having a good week. I know mine is starting off pretty well. I've been thinking about lots of topics, and we're kind of in the swing of wine world right now with Scarborough Renaissance Festival going on and doing two wine shows every day out there every week. So that's a lot of fun, and a lot of other private parties and public tastings. And, things are looking generally good here in the wine world. So I very hope it's the same way in yours. Let's see. So as we talked last, we talked about Texas last, but we've been doing, so did the wine show down at the tower, finished up Old World Wines. Thank you to everybody who came out to visit with us that time and enjoy the show with us up at Reunion Tower. It was a lot of fun, kind of busy, kind of crazy, but we had a good time. And I hope everybody's going to come back and see us for New World Wines on the 7th of May, where we're going to learn about the United States and in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina. So those ought to be a lot of fun. We've also got private show slots available for those that are ready to get out of your quarantine self and have a little visit with your friends who are all vaccinated and ready for partying. You can contact me for private party info. Been having some good hosting business there, so that's fun. Anyhow, today's topic, we're going to be talking about wine words, wine vocabulary. Specifically, we're going to talk about stuff regarding tasting, because I think that's, well, probably the most important part, right? Um, a lot of what I do, educationally speaking, is teach people how to taste wine and how to appreciate different styles of wine and things like that. So one of the things that I get asked about a lot are wine words, and we're going to break it down into a couple of different categories and briefly talk about them before we get on to doing the grocery store grab, which today is the Chateau Souverain from California, Cabernet Sauvignon that I picked up. So anyway, this is an area where we're going to break things down into functional, objective, subjective, and both. So we've got some words in the wine world that are definitive and objective and scientific. We've spoken a little bit about these in the past, where we talked about science of wine, some specifics about how certain things work. We've talked about tannins. We talked about sugar, residual sugar in wine, for instance. There are some very important words. So, for instance, the functional objective words that I can think of are things like residual sugar, acid, and alcohol. Those three big key descriptors are something that in a wine tech sheet, at the very least, they are easily identified, and where we talk about certain percentages of those things being present in wine, we have a number that's associated with them. For instance, residual sugar is often as the RS number is usually expressed as a number of grams per liter. Okay. The acid in a wine is often expressed either at both in its tone, its pH, and its total tartratable acidity. Okay, so those numbers are oftentimes found on a tech sheet. Alcohol by volume, and alcohol is required by law, U.S. law anyway, to be listed on the bottle of the wine. So we have a very definitive number about what ABV means. Alcohol by volume is the percent of this that is ethyl alcohol. So those terms generally are very functional and they're numeric. Okay. But they are still often affected by our perception or our subjectivity. Okay, so our subjective nature of wine language is something we're going to dip into here as well. For instance, there are some functional wine words that I would still refer to as subjective. For instance, we spoke about residual sugar, and that's a numeric value. However, that's not the same thing as the word we often use to describe wine, which is sweetness. Okay, sweetness, not sugar levels, are how we describe a wine. Those are functional and based on perception. Okay, sweetness is how we perceive that value within the context of every other part of the wine. For instance, you'll hear us often talk about four different parts of wine: tannin, acid, alcohol, and sugar or sweetness. Sorry, got to get that very correct, because we talk about sweetness, we're not actually talking just about the physical sugars. We're talking about how sweet it tastes in context. Tannins, the one we already mentioned. Tannins are the astringent series of compounds found in the seed stems and skins of grapes that get into our wine via the winemaking process. Well, astringency is a factor that we don't really have a practical, objective way of measuring that we use commonly in the wine world. There are scientific ways to measure the number of milligrams per kilogram, but that doesn't really help us with the world of wine. So it's not something you see in tech sheets a lot. So tannins are something we're left to describe subjectively, and within the context of the rest of these things, are another way that we have to interpret personally how much we detect or how we feel. Some descripting words, though, that you might hear around the word tannins. We usually just don't say, I taste tannins or I feel tannins, actually, because you don't taste tannins per se. You generally get them as part of a feeling. So they don't have a distinctive odor, aroma, or flavor associated with them. They're mostly associated with the grip or the contact with the skin cells in your mouth. So you often heard of it as what we call grip. In other words, how strongly it feels across your tongue and the lining of your cheeks and tongue, or cheeks and lips rather. Um, you might also hear them referred to as rough or fine or rough or refined, meaning kind of, if you think about it, like a sense of sandpaper, perhaps, where we're talking about that level of amount of grit, where certain types of sandpaper are much rougher, which in tannin world would mean that the tannins are more assertive, they're more dominant on your palate. Same thing with refined, they tend to be softer, less noticeable. Okay, I've also heard them described as either white or green tannins. Like green tannins is those coming from the stems and seeds of grapes if it's a whole cluster press. Uh, so there's a lot of words around tannin that we use, but none of them are objective numbers like we say that's 14.5 ABV. Right? So for being such an important part of the wine's structure, it is probably one of the slipperiest things to understand. Um, so now that we've talked about residual sugar and sweetness slash acid and alcohol and tannin, those are kind of the big functional bodies of how wine is constructed. Okay, and some of them are objective, some are subjective. An important thing to remember about all of those things combined is that when they are combined, that they have strong influences how the others are perceived. For instance, wines that have rough or very coarse tannins might simply be to a winemaking choice, or it might be because the wine is lacking something else to cover them up. For instance, the wine doesn't have a lot of fruit that's still in the wine. If the wine wasn't harvested very ripe, it might be very lean, not have a lot of RS or alcohol to balance it out, so the tannins become very prominent. Okay, so that kind of wine functionality is always interactive. Perceived sweetness is a huge thing. Higher acid wines, or actually, to be more pedantic and specific about it, low wines that are higher in pH, therefore have a softer sense of acid, generally will have this with the exact same amount of sugar, will taste sweeter because the acid isn't counteracting it. So that's a thing to be cautious of and careful with. That when we're talking about our perception, all of these things kind of mesh together and interact, which is, first of all, what makes wine complicated in some ways, but it's also, I think, what makes wine interesting because you're not going to have that same variety just from wine to wine to wine. So, a couple of other functional words that are also subjective are body, finish. So, body is how we describe wine's physical mouth fillingness. How much, I often refer to it as maybe a satiating sensation. I've seen comparisons like that you compare it to other liquids. For instance, like um, is it thin like water or thicker like honey? Although that's actually really extreme. Milk is an example that's often used. The difference between skim milk and whole milk. So skim milk and whole milk, when you put them in your mouth, have very different textures. So that textural component combined with alcohol and tannin and sugar all kind of give us a sense of mouth fillingness in our mouth. And wines that are quote full bodied, that's the way we'll often use that, or light bodied are the opposite sides of a spectrum on that scale. So whole milk is full bodied, skim milk is light bodied. Wines have that same thing. Like I said, there's many factors that can go into giving us that perception, but it's also very subjective. Usually, people and their sensitivity to such things is how we grade that. Because professionals can get together and all kind of say, yeah, we agree this is where it's in a range, but sometimes it's difficult to point to anything specific that says, that wine is full bodied. Now, different varietals of grapes and different styles of wine will tend to produce products that go towards one end of the spectrum or the other. This is due to, in the grapes, for instance, it's due to the variations in their skin and their overall sugar levels that they have when they're normally harvested, and a bunch of other factors. So, for instance, we can talk about dessert wines, for instance, are almost always full bodied, but that's not just because of the styles of grapes they're made from. For instance, you can make Sauternes wine from Sauvignon Blanc grapes, which produces a very light bodied wine. But when we get a very high residual sugar level from the process of making that wine, well, guess what? Now you got a very full bodied wine. So it's not just as simple as that grape equals full body. It's also about process and style. Okay. You might also hear people refer to wines as heavy and lean in the sense of body, but most commonly you're hearing full bodied and lighter body, okay, or medium bodied if you're from the middle. Finish is that lingering flavor after you've had the swallow of wine. So if I take my wine here, I have a sip, throw it around, and well, the amount of time it lingers on our tongue and in our palate, it kind of sits around and has flavor remaining. That's a wine's finish. And again, completely subjective. How your palate particularly approaches it and what you detect within it is something I think that comes with skill and practice. Although some people notice it right away that this beverage tends to stick around, right? It's got a lot to say. So, I might hear it described as. It's usually described as a length of time. Finish literally being, is it a long finish or a short finish? You might also hear it described as a degree of complexity. It had a very simple finish, meaning it had its one fruit note and then it just stopped. Or some complicated wines like, say, Touriga Nacional from Portugal. I was once heard was described by a friend as a very complicated finish. It was a complicated wine because it had all these layers of flavor that kept unfolding long after the sip was swallowed. All those flavors and aromas were developing in your mouth and your palate, and then going into your olfactory chamber through your reverse olfactory sense, right? You're breathing in through your nose, right? When you breathe through out retronasal, breathe out. Well, there's those passages in the back of your throat still adding flavor. So that's one of the reasons why. But again, it is a subjective word. Okay, so some words, though, a lot of the wine words we talk about, in fact, I would say the bulk of the things I speak about in describing a wine comes down to the descriptor words, just the flavor words. We're talking about aromas primarily here, but also we're talking, pardon me, we're also talking about the aroma combination between that which your palate provides, things like sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami, temperature, texture, right? Those things, viscosity. We're also talking about then the olfactory sense that identifies individual flavors. So this aromas are often associated with a particular can often be associated with particular types of chemicals. For instance, when we talk about priazines, priazines are the green pepper, peppery note that we find in certain types of grapes, like Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay, it's the other varieties. So methoxypriazines. We talk about TDN, which is a diesel or petrol type smell. Okay, so some of these things we know this particular chemical usually and in most people kicks off this sense of flavor. Okay, so I'm not trying to get you focused on priazines or TDN or anything else like that. I'm actually just wanting you to think about the number and variety of descriptor words that we use about wine that don't have anything to do with grapes. Things like flowers or wood, spices, and earth, right? These aromas come from a lot of different parts of the winemaking process, both from the growing processes to the storage process to fermentation to wood and aging and all kinds of stuff. But all of them are perceptive and all of them therefore can be subjective. Just because the grape has priazines in it, if you're not particularly sensitive to them, or you haven't been trained to recognize them, you may not associate that smell with bell pepper, green pepper, jalapeno, like some of us in the wine world would. So understand that it takes practice for most people to learn to describe aromas in more than just broad strokes. I tell every class of mine when I'm teaching them how to taste wine is that if you don't taste or smell the same things that I do or that your neighbor does, that's okay. Understand that this is a very personal experience, that you have each person's sense of smell is very linked to their own sense of memory, and therefore if you haven't been trained and don't practice as often as some of the rest of us do, you may not get those things yet. It's okay. Everybody's body is different, everybody's memory is different, everybody's life experience is different. This to me is actually one of the more interesting and fun parts about learning about wine, because I often get asked, when I say I smell blackberry in wine, I say, well, does that mean there's blackberries in it? The answer is no, not at all, but it has very reminiscent flavors or aromas that remind me of blackberries. So that whole segment of aroma identifiers, I would encourage you to remember that they are very subjective, that they take practice, and to really get in there and start exploring what we're talking about when we talk about it. For a better word, to be circular about it. When we speak of these, what are we speaking of, and how can you get involved and help, free your mind and go, okay, what am I really getting into? One of the things that I have a plan on doing here in the upcoming summer is Two Penny Beer and I are going to do a combined show where we're going to do basically we're going to do, it's all about flavor. We're going to try a lot of different wines, and we're going to try a lot of different smells. We're going to specifically, wines and beers actually, and we're going to specifically work on identification using the actual objects. So rather than say, does it smell like raspberries? We're going to have some raspberries there. Some raspberries and some raspberry jam, right? And maybe some dried ones. There's some whole kinds of opportunities to look into. For instance, I get a lot of questions around herbal notes. Practicing the difference between tarragon and thyme is an important part of learning that herbal range. We're also going to break it down in both beer and wine categories into some of the more popular things. For instance, we're going to demonstrate that priazine note that we talked about. We'll do the 4-MMP, cat piss or gooseberry note that we talk about in Sauvignon Blanc. We'll do TDN and Diesel and Rieslings. And so we're going to really dive in by directly smelling both the wines, the actual products where practical, and really just practice a flavor crash course. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, keep your eyes open. It will be coming up there pretty soon. And then lastly, some words that I would change in the wine world. I speak about this quite often, and that is I hate the word dry. Dry, when it comes to wine, beer, and spirits, means the opposite of sweet. It means there's no sugar left over after the fermentation process. The beverage is not sweet. And that's bad, because in the wine descriptor, where it's not sweet, in most of the rest of English vernacular, it means the opposite of wet. Okay? And this conflicts in two ways. One, the word physically means the same. Physically, it describes something that isn't happening in the wine, because the wine isn't tasting physically dry. Okay? It definitely tastes wet. And in fact, the more acidic a wine is, the more you will get a juicy or wet feeling in your mouth. The more your salivary glands react to acid is by salivating. So we often have a wine that is characterized as dry, meaning no sugar, but also juicy at the same time. That's not a practical word choice, because we're using opposites about the same descriptors. So in the same way that dry also often gets confused with tannins, because tannins are astringent and they contract your pores, they make your mouth not salivate. That leads to a physical drying sensation in the mouth that some people mistake for dry, meaning the word for not sugary. So that little confluence of those words, I would change just the word dry. Have it mean, if we're going to talk about dry, we can talk about it in the terms, I would reserve it for tannins, not sugars. I would talk about unsweet versus sweet, and I would talk about wet versus dry, because then we're talking about a spectrum of acid versus tannin. All right, and that kind of gives us a better idea of physical descriptions of what's going on in our mouth, rather than a random term that is a holdover from an older version of our language to mean no sugar. Okay? So, champagne for change. All right, let me get back on the chat here and say hello to everybody. Donna and Mary, David, Mary, hello to you guys. Donna says that yummy is a wine word. Yes, yummy is definitely a wine word. It really just depends on what type of wine, when, and how, whether how many yummies you're going to give it. Mark and Betty say that they just got back from a cactus photo trip to Joshua Tree. Well, awesome. That sounds like a fun outing of the day. And Donna said, yeah, I had a wine that smelled and tasted like gasoline. Never bought it again. Now, that may be an issue of a flaw. If you had some sort of gasoline type thing, there might have been something where, and I have a question, you see if you can answer this in the chat for me. Did it have a cork or did it have a Stelvin closure, a screw cap? I'll answer your question if you choose to answer. But understand that, first off, most of those descriptors that I just used, for every one of those chemical aroma options that I just said, from 4-MMP, which smells like cat pee or ammonia, to priazines, which smell like green peppers and jalapenos, to TDN, which smells like diesel aroma, none of the wines actually have that taste left in them. Okay? You take a nice Riesling from the Mosel, and it has this distinctive diesel or rubber aroma to it. As soon as you taste it, all you get is beautiful white flowers and green apples and awesome. It doesn't taste like you're biting into a tire. And that's, again, it's one of those ways that how our aroma sense, our physical sense of smell works, is that those chemicals slot into the same nerve endings, and our brain goes, oh, that smells like this, because it's programmed to do so. See, if the wine was cork, now that might mean it was stored around or spilled near something that had gasoline. Cork is porous, and because it is so, wines can and will absorb aromas from around them. Level of how quickly depends, but generally speaking, especially something that's very strong smelling like gasoline, is very likely to permeate those wines if something was spilled on it or it was stored near a can, for instance. Again, if it was a commercial thing, I would bet that it probably was some sort of accident. But remember, these little buggers can betray you because they are not airtight. And so do not store them for lengths of time near anything offensive smelling or strong smelling. So, good lesson learned there. But I would encourage you actually to buy it again. This is the thing where just because you had one bad bottle does not mean you should stop buying or trying a wine, especially if you've heard good things about it in the past. Wines get flawed, but they're usually flawed at the bottle level, not at the constructed level, not at the maker level. Especially if a wine had an off flavor like that, I would definitely take it back to the store you bought it, have them smell and taste it, give you a refund, and try a separate bottle, maybe from a different batch if there's one available, or maybe try it from a different store. But don't write off a wine just because you had a bad one time. That's like, you might have, the first time you've ever had a dish, a particularly cooked dish that was made with the incorrect ingredients or with less than quality ingredients, you may not like it either. I often associate this to being like, if the first person that had you try milk only had you try sour milk, you'd probably never drink milk again either. But that doesn't mean that milk tastes bad. It means that one milk had gone bad. So give it another go and let us know how it goes. All right, it's time for the grocery store grab, which that means this is our wonderful effort to help everybody get the best value per dollar for wines that are purchased at non-specialty and non-big box retailers. A lot of us, for convenience or necessity, happen to shop at grocery stores for our wine. And because of that, we don't particularly have a well-trained wine staff to fall back on. And we need to rely on our own knowledge and senses in this rainbow of opportunity when it comes to buying wine. The price points for wine are often in a reasonable level with grocery stores as well, where you're rarely finding very expensive or hard to find wines. In fact, I guarantee you won't find hard to find wine at a grocery store. It's literally the opposite definition. If somebody can afford to put their wine in a grocery store, that means that they're a pretty major producer. That being said, we focus on the label, and we let the label tell us important information about it, and we reward wines that give us good information on the bottle. So most of our wines tend to run in the, say, $7 to $20 range, but that's what we get out of the grocery store. So let's go ahead and take a look at today's example. Studio, and we'll open up our images cap. This is Chateau Souverain Cabernet Sauvignon, California. Caught my eye as this kind of dramatic black label. Very simple. They've got some interesting iconography here. So something about grapes and kings and bears and being established in 1944. California obviously have the state bear. Their state animal is the now extinct golden grizzly. The crown, I'm assuming, is some sort of reference to being royalty in Chateau Lake. The grape leaf that you see there on the left, and the 1944 was, according to their label, when they were established. So that's the front of the label. Very simple. Not but again, can be very dramatic when standing out from a lot of other photographic labels, and especially in its nice little white silver on dark black. It does say it's 13.9% alcohol by volume and is rated as a California wine. So we have a broad area of opportunity for them to be pulling grapes from. They're not specific to any one American viticultural area. Now, that probably means that this wine, because of this wine's price point, that's what they're doing. This wine was listed before its discount, if you will, at $17, $16.99. But then if you are a member of that particular grocery store, you get it for $10.99. So 17 down to 11. And then they even offer a further discount for 6-pack carrier prices down to $10. So a very reasonably priced wine. But remember, when you see those numbers in the store, what we're actually tasting. This is an $11 bottle of Cab, and we should rate and expect out of it what we get for that level. Okay. Looking on the back label here, I will read to you the rooted in California winemaking history, Chateau Souverain has a legacy of quality dating back to 1944. Our portfolio of wines is a contemporary expression of a time-honored tradition. Well, knowing a little bit about California winemaking, that puts you only about 80 or 90 years late to the game, but whatever, that's your marketing spiel. Now, our rich Cabernet Sauvignon features flavors of dark red fruit and black cherry, while round tannins and a hint of vanilla create a classic balanced finish. So this is the usual format that I like to see. Go ahead and get your marketing spiel out of the way, and then give me some information. Or actually, I'd reverse the order personally. But that, when I read this label, I was like, there you go. That is a very good clause that gives us the information we want. We want what the wine tastes like, flavor words, and if they're doing a good job, specific pairings with food. But here, so they speak of dark red fruits, so that's and black cherry. So there's a fruit component with recognizable words. Round tannins. Now remember, tannins is a little bit of a wine word, but round as a descriptor is kind of in that same band and genre as refined, meaning that they're soft on your mouth. They're not harsh. Okay. And then this last, a hint of vanilla. The hint of vanilla for wine geeks, we know that usually means that that means that they got some oak use in it. At this level of price point, I'm betting they're doing oak staving rather than fully oak aging. But we're gonna find out. So they said we're gonna run through, and we usually rate the wines on 3 things here: is it well executed, is it on style, and is it worth the price point? So color is a classic Cabernet Sauvignon, dark ruby, it's very intense. It's got a very concentrated look, where it's very difficult to see through the wines, and a high degree of concentration. Okay, that's good. Usually means a high extract, although there are ways to manipulate that. So let's find out whether they've executed well on their flavor words, on their aromas. I would totally agree. Dark cherry. It's got definitely a dark cherry, and although I wouldn't say red fruits, this tends more towards the black fruit type of thing. More blackberry syrup, dark cherry pit, and there's even a little hint of what's that back in the back? It doesn't have the distinctive Cabernet Pyrzines that we've been talking about. I say Pyrzines all the time. Pyrzines that we're usually looking for in a cab. But remember, 75% or more, and they can call it Cabernet. Maybe rounding this out with some other grapes to help flesh it out. But again, nice dark fruit aromas. Hitting the kind of that point, and it's got a good bit of aroma to it. It's not hard to smell at all. Let's go ahead and take a sip. Okay, definitely perfectly dry style. The fruit that comes through is carried well by the tannins. The tannins, I would agree, are pretty moderated, mostly in the center of your tongue. They're not gripping the cheeks and lining of your mouth, the cheeks, and the lips is usually where I detect high tannin strengths. The middle of my tongue is expecting where I should be hitting it, and it's doing a good job of letting those tannins be a carrier for the other flavors. You definitely have a sweeter dark cherry smell than you do as far as the taste is concerned, which is good and again on style. We don't want a big sweet black cherry cola here. What we want is a well structured dark fruit wine. All right, so yeah, definitely hitting all around the side of the palate. A lot of acidity, so you got no mouth wateringness. That's not surprising at all, but definitely definitely hitting the dark cherry and dark fruit notes all the way through. I'm really not getting much of their vanilla that they were claiming in there, but they definitely hit the round tannin descriptor, I think, very well. This is a very moderate, very restrained cab for its price point. It's not hammering you with tannins. It's not trying too hard, and it is giving up a fair degree of fruit. Is it worth the price tag? Oh yeah, at this price weight, I think it's certainly punching in its right weight class, as the boxers would say. It's definitely got the right amount of quality construction and interest for its level. Now, could you pick this up out of a lineup as a Cabernet Sauvignon from California? Maybe. This is that point where, in this level of price point, sometimes it can be difficult because the wines tend to be rather non-specific. Remember, it's a California designated wine, so it can have grapes from a lot of different places. I mean, the AVAs are not very, they're not very stringent when it comes to how and what you can grow. So in America, when you tend to go broad, it just means you're sourcing from whatever you can get inexpensively to meet your needs that is quality at your acceptable level. So they're probably buying grapes from a lot of places, bringing them in, juicing them into the bottle. But yeah, not bad. Um, I think their play at 1944 being old in the world of California winemaking is interesting if you actually know anything about California winemaking. I mean, Gretzky was making wines in the 1870s in wine, so they're in California. So 44 is definitely a post-prohibition start to the world of winemaking, post-prohibition and likely post, although technically not post-war, probably somebody that was starting up new businesses thereafter, trying to get back to normal after World War II. So interesting, not bad. Again, just certainly for 11, $12 Cabernet, this is on the point. So you guys go ahead and give it a try. See what you guys think. I'd love to hear your comments about the grocery store grab down below. Also, let me know what your favorite wine words are if you have questions about them. I didn't go really deep into technical slash really some of the weirder wine words, but definitely there's a lot more to be discussed out there. So, Q&A time. Is there anybody that has a question or a comment in the chat? I don't see anybody as I've been chatting here, but I'll give it a couple of minutes while we discuss what's coming soon. We've got Will It Blend, the Bordeaux edition, coming up online. And that would be the 29th. So next Thursday, not tomorrow, but Thursday from tomorrow. So say in 8 days, we're going to do the Will It Blend Bordeaux version. But before that, in fact, this weekend on the 24th and 25th, we'll be doing the Will It Blend show at Scarborough Renaissance Festival. That's a summary between old world styles, new world styles. So I've got a couple of different whites, a couple of different reds from different places in different styles around the world. And we're going to talk about the rise of blend popularity in American culture in the last 5 or 6, 10 years. And then we'll talk about some of the iconic styles that inspired those things and how the new world, as usual, has done its own damn thing and created some really cool new styles that I think are some of my favorites in the world. So Will it blend on the weekend? Will it blend next Thursday? The day, and then the week after that, on the 1st and 2nd of May, we're going to go Wines of Germany down at the Renaissance Festival. So that's another inspirational, fun thing for those of you that like light, easy to drink wines. The Germans are elegant, are very good at producing elegant and nuanced both reds and whites. So we're going to try some of those in a couple weeks. And then the next big live show for the public is on 7th of May. Friday the 7th of May, we're going to do New World Wines down at the Tower once more. So you can join us downtown, 500 feet over the Dallas skyline, and enjoy some wine with yours truly. Probably going to work on putting the place getting under a microphone this time, too, because it got loud last time. I had to walk around and speak to people in my cone projecting voice. I mean, even though I'm a trained public speaker, people I can't overpower 60 drunks. It's just, I'm just saying. So anyway, yeah, would you rather fight one bottle? We should fight one wine bottle size, 160 wine bottle size drunks, or one 60-foot high drunk. I don't know. There's a duck joke in there somewhere. Anyway, all right, guys. Well, I hope you have an excellent week. I want you guys to go out and try some more wine. Free your mind and your glass will follow. If you like what we're doing, like and subscribe. I know we've got some new subscribers to the channel. I thank you guys for joining us. We're growing at a nice and steady pace. While my job is not to be a YouTube star, I hope to bring real wine, practical wine knowledge to you guys at home all the time and get you guys into some classes as well. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, share with a wine-loving friend. If you really like what we're doing and would like a deep dive into some cooler stuff and kind of behind the scenes with WineShark, join up on my Patreon. The support for my Patreon goes directly to making some of this stuff happen, and it's really critical to helping me understand what the audience wants. You get direct audience feedback. You get to choose the topics of the shows that come up. You get extra behind the scenes content, discounts, all kinds of stuff. So if you want to join us on Patreon, that would be awesomer. And you get exclusive content as well. So until next time, guys, I hope that you have a glass on your own. Come see me soon. And until the next time, I've been your wine shark. Cheers. So good. Not bad at all. I think now I've got to figure out what I'm gonna have for dinner with my new wine. Because I don't think I have anything that would match this right now. Everything is light in the kitchen. Score myself a juicy burger.